to another episode of Gov Tech Today. I'm Russell Lowery.
And I'm Jen Saha.
And together we try and bridge the gap between .com and .gov. Today we're going to have a conversation about the most important policy document that the state of California produces, which is the budget. It's a process, a public and private process that plays out in the Capitol and various venues around the state that winds up spending in this year a little over $300 billion with combined federal, state, and special funds and taxes. That's a lot of money, and we're going to dive down and try and understand it a little bit. How did you approach your analysis of the state budget as you prepared to kind of give your clients an overview of what's going on?
So we really focus in on the technology components. And I mean, we all know technology is in everything. So, even if you're building a road, there are technology components involved in that and technology that supports being able to accomplish that. But for my specific client list, really focused on IT services, equipment, software, hardware. So we start there. And it's also important to know, like everyone, again, working in government, everything is transparent, but you have to know the right places to look, right? So the Department of Finance and the governor release a budget summary. It's high level, it's a summary on purpose. And so digging into each of those departments and agencies, all of the budget change proposals that exist out there, which is basically like we take last year's budget, we put a bunch of change proposals forward. Some of those are accepted, some of those are rejected. And then we come out the other side of that with this year's budget. That's sort of the process. And we've talked many times on our show about sort of what goes into that process, when it starts, when you need to make an impact. And January 10th, we had a new budget rolled out.
Well, and we're going to some of those details, but I think our listeners might benefit. I'm a budget nerd. I've negotiated budgets with the governor and the legislative leaders and been part of that process as a staffer in that process. And the interaction between the governor, the legislative leaders, where state agencies get involved, the staff wrangling over those budget change proposals. Some of that happens in public, but a lot of it happens in private. But when you look at this document as an expression of what direction is the state going, there were major headlines about multi-billion-dollar deficits, spending freezes. You had state employees that were worried about were they going to get cut, agencies hunkering down and putting projects on pause and hold. That fear is largely gone with the release of this document. The economy in California hasn't taken the hit that we were projecting. A lot of AI investment in California, a vast majority of AI venture capital dollars are flowing into the state. So it's just changed the economic picture of the state. So that fear is gone. So does that mean it's open season? Are you seeing, in your analysis, are you seeing budget change proposals that rip roaring like the days of the huge surpluses?
So I think we are conservatively optimistic. You're right. We have a balanced budget that's been proposed. Depends on who you ask. The governor says, yeah, we have a couple $100 million surplus. The legislative analyst office says we have like almost a $2 billion deficit, but it really is thanks to those big three revenue sources. So personal income tax, corporation tax, and sales tax in California basically make up our budget. That's how much money we have to spend. And you're right, all of those have performed really well. So it does take a lot of pressure off of, hey, we're going to have a huge hole, and we have to find ways to fill that hole with potentially people's livelihoods or jobs or technology projects. And the state did a pretty good job of sort of tempering our expectations for we're not going to be wildly spending in this new coming year as well. So
when I watched the governor's announcement, traditionally he gives a press conference on January 10th. It's a command performance for everybody around the Capitol. This year, in light of the fires, he had a more abbreviated presentation on the road, and his director of the Department of Finance gave the traditional January 10th. But I watched that conference and I rewatched it, and there was some exciting tech news. Now, not the big numbers associated with a specific implementation, but he was very pointed about calling out both the AI implementation and planned expansions there. But something that caught my attention, and I've looked at detail in the printed version, but there's details to come, but he kind of pointed toward a new procurement process, a revamp of technology procurement that's going to dramatically speed things up. And I'm sure that is going to get everyone in Sacramento's attention.
yeah, I mean, one of the sort of dreaded words in California government procurement is PAL,
Right.
the project approval lifecycle.
We've talked about it before, but why don't you just give a brief description of PAL? What is the PAL
Sure.
process?
If I have a big technology project, I have to put that project through this life cycle, and it involves everything from vetting your idea to make sure it's what we should be doing to, what are the alternatives that you could be doing? Why did you pick this instead of that? To the procurement process, and are you checking all the boxes there? PAL is operated by our Department of Technology in California. They wrote it, came up with it, but it's a process. It's 18, 24 months, probably minimum to get
right.
through it. There's 4 stages. It's very involved. So, the efficiency side of it is like, let's get rid of it. But there's a reason for PAL.
I try and when I hear people complain about it, I remind people that we had a series of $100+ million disasters, things
Sure.
that did not work, and the legislature and the public had lost confidence in the state's ability to execute on large-scale technology projects. And at least part of the state's response to that was this initiation of a PAL process to get a more thoughtful result. Now, people can quibble on whether that's been effective or not, but there was a reason for it. And from what you saw during the announcement and the details that you've read, did it sound like they're just getting rid of that? Or
No,
okay.
They're definitely not getting rid of it. Look, it's accountability, and we need that in our government processes for spending of these taxpayer dollars, but they are reimagining it.
Right.
And we're not just talking about little tweaks here and there. I think they're sort of re-envisioning how technology moves forward in the state. I mean, there are significant problems with it. Like, a number of these projects are hung up in PAL for so long that they're losing federal match dollars because
Right.
they're just running out of time. We couldn't match and able to draw down because we couldn't procure this on time because it's hung up in PAL. Like, that's a bad place to be too. So
Technology moves so fast. I had a conversation with a CIO who expressed the frustration that they were doing their job. They thought they were doing a good job with the approval process that they had. The technology execution was just what they wanted, but by the time they were moving on the procurement, it was 4 years later, and the technology had changed and the department's needs had changed.
Yep.
So they perfectly executed what was given to them on paper, and it just didn't meet the client need 4 years later.
right.
And with the speed that we're seeing, we just have to come up with a different way to do that.
I think they've been working on it, and they've given some hints, and the fact that this was even written in, like, from working in state departments, if you make the governor's budget summary,
Right.
which is, like, very high level,
Right.
you're a big deal.
Right.
Like, all eyes are on you. The fact that this doesn't even have dollars tied to it.
Right.
Like, it wasn't, hey, we're appropriating X amount of money to do this. It was just, we're working on this. We know it's a problem. We're going to improve it. The fact that that was even made the A pages, the governor's budget summary, is a big deal.
And that it was part of his articulated highlight when he, in a scaled down presentation, he still carved out space for that. I'm very supportive of the RFI2 process. I think the state's done a great job. I love the idea of the state really focusing on defining their problem and then opening it up to the vendor community to propose solutions to solve it. I love that. But I think, and it's hard, no one wants to criticize, this is the technology leadership of the state.
Nothing's perfect.
But I think it should be stated that you picked a series of projects with full implementation and staffing, and you're paying $1 for 6 months worth of work. You're only hearing solutions from well-funded, resourced, big companies that can afford to do that. And particularly in AI, there's a lot of new companies who are doing fantastic things that might be able to do them cheaper, more efficiently, but there's no way they could do that for 6 months for $1.
Yep.
So it's instructive that there's not a lot of small business or DVB or those components in those projects. And that's not saying those issues are the number one concern of the state procurement process, but as we move to streamline, as we move to do things quicker, we can't say, oh yeah, but we still need to meet, and then how do we meet our small business DVB requirements? We need to build it at the front end with some of these businesses in mind, and I look forward to working with the state to make that happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think if we can build accountability into a process and not have it halt or slow down these things that are, we need it today, then I think that's really the sweet spot, is where you can balance that accountability and the opportunity to procure some of these new innovations very quickly.
Well, there were I think we covered some of the highlights and the macro issues with the budget. I think there were some technology spend issues that were worth focusing on. There are several large scale technology projects. The ones that come to mind for me were the cybersecurity and the work both at the community college level to implement local and statewide technology projects, and then funding for OES. They got a significant increase for more auditing and things in the cybersecurity realm. Were there other spend items that caught your attention that you want to spotlight for the audience?
I think continuing projects, huge projects that we know we need to continue. So EDD Next, the big modernization of our unemployment insurance system, continuing on another 130 million in there, approaching $1 billion total for that overarching modernization over there. Also, a lot of modernization projects in the HHS space, which I thought was rightfully so and really needed. A lot of them got started during COVID. It really opened up our eyes to, hey, like, we're working on systems from the 80s, and we are trying to deal with disasters today that are happening in real time. So encouraged by that, I saw a lot of additional resource requests, a lot of moving with corporate real estate doing what it's doing. The state's getting out of corporate office spaces, moving into state-owned office buildings. They just built a new complex of state offices close to downtown Sacramento. So a bunch of requests for moving expenses. Along with that comes a technology component that people don't really think of. Are we wired for high-speed internet? Are ours secure? And do we have all of the equipment we need? So some spending there that I think is encouraging, and probably you're spending in the short term to save money in the long term. So that's really encouraging, but overall very conservative. Like, I think the director of finance stated we only have about $1 billion, a little over $1 billion in new spending here. And that's pretty telling that we're really being very fiscally prudent with how we're proposing new things.
I think what you said about the building and modernization really caught my attention as well. We we have a hybrid system. COVID kind of forced it. You had
Mhm.
pre-COVID, where essentially there was no work from home, to immediately massive work from home, and that can hybrid by design works really well. Hybrid in crisis, maybe not so well. And I think of the impacts in three areas. You've got storage, you've got communication, and you've got security
Mhm.
issues. And if you design a building from the start, not to discriminate against workers who are joining a meeting remotely or giving access to the public, so it's meaningful engagement with what the proceedings and what's going on, you can achieve a different result than if you just build a building and you haven't considered the communications and the hybrid environment right from the start. You're not going to get as good a result.
Yep, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's also, everyone is chomping at the bit. We see it in the budget. Let's go talk to the department.
Right.
It's January. There is a long way until July. Like, I think 2020 taught us this lesson, right? Where like the January budget proposal,
Right.
because of the pandemic, looked
Very
very
different.
different. I mean, God willing, we will not have another 2020 on our
Right.
hands, but things can change. Things can change incredibly rapidly. I mean, for instance, all of this was written before the wildfires in Los Angeles even broke out.
Exactly.
And so, how does that impact what this looks like today and what it will look like in a May revised timeline or in July when everything is finally enacted? But I think overall, and you mentioned this before, this is a pretty good list of priorities that the governor has. And in a state that is supermajority Democrat, where everyone's pretty much going to be on board, there's going to be some back and forth. But I mean, you've been a part of this budget process. So, like, what do you anticipate this is going to look like in July? Like, is it going to be what we're seeing today?
I think you're going to see a wildfire response addendum and changes. The executive orders are still being written as we record. Significant fires are still burning in LA, and those folks are certainly top of mind for us as we're recording. But the policy response will be a thoughtful and I think aggressive response. And so typically I would look at this budget and say, you can anticipate more dollars, get in line, start, you and skate to where the puck is headed, and I'll work with the department to get a BCP ready or the justification ready to align it with some of the governor's priorities. In this case, I suspect that the wildfire response is gonna take a lot of any extra that appears between now and May. I think that is largely, and another element that we haven't talked about, but about a third of the budget comes from the federal government, and certainly the dynamics between a Governor Newsom with 2 years left, who's widely anticipated to make a run for the presidency, and sort of his engagement with President Trump is going to have some budget impact. Now, we don't know exactly what that is, but my take on it was about 75% of the money that the state gets from the Fed is tied with health insurance and health and human services programs. And other big states are recipients of those funds too. So I anticipate that any losses are going to be around the edges, but I think the health and human services space is one to watch very closely.
Yep.
For that dynamic between the governor and the president.
I think you're right. I think there is a sense of panic that sets in when you see all the rhetoric back and forth between our incoming president and our governor. But a lot of that is programmatic. A lot of that is in entitlement programs that frankly take a ton of time to
Right.
to cut if
Right.
you are going to cut them.
Right.
And you have to have a Congress on board. Sometimes you have to have a constitutional change on
Right.
board. So change takes time. And regardless of even if the president were on day one to say, cut off all funding to California, even that type of change would take a ton of time and require a lot of buy-in from other parties involved. So I think you're right that if there is an impact, it will be thought out and it will take a lot of time and probably won't be an impact on this July 1st, 2025 budget.
Well, as we wrap up, the budget can seem obscure to people. I think some people think of it as hard and complicated, which it is. But I have to say, AI tools have made the budget so much more accessible. I've negotiated budgets. I've read and listened to thousands of hours worth of material, and part of my work for some of my clients. I did some loading of the documents into Notebook LM, and it produced quality results in 10 seconds. I could query and go back and forth with the documents. Now I knew which documents to look for and I knew which questions to ask. And so I'm not diminishing expertise, but the actual document is that analysis is available
Yep.
much more broadly than it's ever been before. And I'm eager to see how the public can engage in maybe in a more substantive way based on those available tools. I know it'll shape my business.
It's for sure exciting. You're right. And I mean, just the fact that we're able to film this so quickly after all of this was made public is a testament to that exact tools and functions.
Well, thanks for sharing your expertise. I hope the audience got something out of it. And as the budget plays out, we'll probably revisit these topics again.
More to come.